Let's bring in Bob Costas, Hall of Fame broadcaster, MLB Network host, play-by-play voice. Good morning, Bob. Let me start with the NFL. What do you make of this expansion?
Don't start with the NFL. Let's start with Fritzy. I think on tomorrow's show, he should just open up with this overrated list. Willie Mays, Wayne Gretzky, Michael Jordan, and Jim Brown, and then let the conversation go wherever it's going to go. Lump them in with the grotesquely overrated Beatles and Bruce Springsteen and go from there.
Can an opinion be factually wrong?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that ridiculous? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is why callers call in, people write songs, and they say, suck it, back row, because of the comments I have from the back row here, and Fritzy leading the charge here.
Well, actually, there are no stats except for records sold and, I guess, concert attendance. There's no stats when it comes to the Beatles or Springsteen or whomever. But when it comes to sports, yeah, you can argue around the edges whether Wilt Chamberlain was better than Kareem, but you at least have some statistics to refer to, so you can't say outright that either one of them is greatly overrated.
I remember you did the interview with Springsteen when he was doing the halftime show.
Yeah.
How big of a sports fan is Springsteen?
Huge baseball fan. But he actually said on that occasion, I don't really follow football, and he said with a laugh, we've got a record to promote, and this is the best possible place to promote it. But so he said, "Don't ask me any football questions."
Has he been to a game that you've been at? Baseball?
Yes. In 1998, he brought his then young son Evan to St. Louis on the weekend that Sosa and McGuire were vying. They were each close to 60 or 61, and he went down into the Cardinal clubhouse and actually traded a Springsteen guitar for a Mark McGuire bat.
Wow.
And he stayed for the whole series. He stayed for all three games.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
What do you make of NFL expansion? Do they eventually, can we get to the point of no return with the NFL?
I guess you could, but I don't think they've reached it. The interest is extremely high, and football is different from baseball. They play a shorter regular season. The only real difference would be, I guess, as I understand it, only the top division winner in each conference would get a bye instead of the first two, but it doesn't drastically alter the setup. It shortens the preseason, which fans like. I guess they'll throw in an extra bye week. They might push the Super Bowl, and this also makes sense, push it to President's Weekend. The whole thing actually makes sense, both from a business standpoint and from a competitive standpoint. I think it makes sense. They're going to have to expand the rosters because of the wear and tear of the season if you're going to add an extra game and add an extra bye week. But it seems like all those necessary steps are logical and don't really upset the apple cart all that much.
Yeah, I agree with the President's Weekend, because then that gives you that holiday, that Monday after the Super Bowl that a lot of people take off anyway. Now you're saying, hey, we acknowledge that. You can take off that day of work. I'm told they're only going to add maybe one or two more players to the roster when they go to 17-game regular season schedule.
I'm no expert on this, but that doesn't seem like enough to me.
No.
And I think the Players Association would have a very strong case to argue for more.
Why isn't the Astros story going away?
Because I think the players are keeping it going and adding extra fuel. I'm sure you've mentioned this before. At the height or depth of the steroid era, lots of players would privately express their concern. And eventually they pushed the Players Association to recognize that many of their own members were victims rather than participants in PED use. But they never said anything publicly. This was before players had Twitter accounts and Instagram and everything else, and that adds fuel to the fire too. But I think what's really keeping it going is how outspoken and adamant the players themselves have been, because we in the press and baseball officials had their say within the last few weeks. But now it's the players. Once spring training has arrived and they're being asked questions or going on their social media accounts, it's the players now that are really keeping it going.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how this ends. You know, everybody wants something out of this, and I don't know what that something is. And I said, if you want to take away the trophy and vacate it, okay, fine. If I can't punish the players, then I don't want people picking up a baseball and throwing it 95 miles an hour at them and extracting some, kind of revenge. But What would be your solution where you think that you could placate the players and the fans affected by this?
I said this the day the story broke after the Athletic had Mike Fiers' information, and then eventually the commissioner came down with his penalties, and Jim Crane fired Hinch and Luhnow, that my suspicion was, and it turned out to be correct, that they had to grant immunity to the players, both because of existing understandings in the basic agreement and because they would have gotten huge pushback from the Players Association in any case. So that was a road they didn't want to go down. But I speculated at that time that they could very well wind up in the same place they wound up with steroids and PEDs, which was that eventually they recognized that there was mutual interest here. The Players Association would have to agree, and they're hearing it from their members now when it comes to the Astros, they'd have to agree that the majority of players are victims when other players cheat. And so in the next basic agreement, I think they're going to have to codify penalties, just like they eventually did with steroids. They're going to have to codify penalties. This is what happens to players if and when they're caught doing this kind of stuff. But if I can, Dan, I'm going to go against the tide a little bit when a lot of people have said, fans and some people in the press, this is no deterrent. Manfred's initial ruling, this is no deterrent because the players themselves weren't punished. But I don't think that makes that much sense because they said beforehand in the memo in September of 2017 and in their penalties, Hinch fired,
Luhnow
suspended, then fired, then Luhnow, then Cora, then eventually Beltran, although that wasn't a commissioner's decision, but the Mets decided. What's clear is this. There's no way that players, even if they want to do it again, if some player somewhere wants to do it again, there's no way that coaches and managers wouldn't know about it. Hinch knew about it, all right? No manager is going to say, you know what? Let me weigh the risk-reward. It's worth it to destroy or at least significantly derail my entire career and look the other way while these players are cheating. So I think actually, if you think about the practical effect, this is a deterrent. No coach or manager or general manager, if he knows about it, is going to let this go on and run the risk to his career.
Talking to Bob Costas, what do you think happens with the Red Sox?
You know, I'm a little vague on that. I don't know if most of it is Cora related, going back to Houston and then compounded by whatever might have happened with the Red Sox. But the few Red Sox who have commented, J.D. Martinez and Keith Moreland, have said, not Keith Moreland, I'm thinking back to the old Cubs. I got my Morelands confused. I'm on the West Coast, Dan. This is too early in the morning for me. Anyway, Mitch Moreland, they have kind of flatly said, we're not aware of anything that went on. We don't expect that we as a team are going to be hit all that hard. But we'll see within a week. They say that the decision will be rendered by the end of next week.
Well, it won't be the players because they can't get punished, right?
Right. But they were saying we weren't aware of anything going on at all. They can't be punished, but if you were aware that something was going on, you would think you wouldn't walk out on the limb that way and say, nothing to see here. But we'll find out.
And last time you were on, you were talking about expanding the playoffs, or you wanted to clarify something you said last time you were on.
Yeah. Baseball has floated an idea about expanding the playoffs, where you'd have the three division winners, and the best division winner would get a bye, and then you would have 4 wild cards. And I said to you that I thought that some of this had merit and was worth discussing. I don't have any problem with a television show as a selection show. It's an interesting idea to let the higher-seeded teams pick their opponents. There might be some strategy involved there. But it was made to seem, not by you, but by some people, as if I was promoting this idea or that I was all in. And what I actually said was, this is a starting point. And there's lots of ways that you could come at it. And the one thing that you have to be mindful of, and I've always said this, going back to when they added the first wild card, is the difference between baseball and other sports, the difference between the history of a pennant race and mere playoff qualifying, and, of course, the difference in the length of the season. The NFL goes and expands, as we just talked about. Their season is a tenth as long, roughly, as baseball's season. So you can't, I don't think you can throw division winners. Last year, for example, in the American League, 3 teams won more than 100 games. It's one thing to say the 2 wild cards have to play a 1-game knockout or a best 2 out of 3. If you come in through the side door, that makes sense. Or if you play a whole season and you wind up in a dead heat, Giants and Dodgers played 2 out of 3 in 51. The Bucky Dent game, the Yankees and Red Sox played a single game, but that makes sense because they played to a dead heat over 154 or 162. But if you play 162 games, or wherever they wind up, 156, and one team wins 100 and the other is the fourth wild card and has a 500 record, then a best 2 out of 3 might not be an acceptable crapshoot. Think of how often, this is baseball, not basketball or football, think of how often a team that wins 90-plus games loses 2 out of 3 at home during the course of the season to a team that finishes under 500 because it's baseball. So I'm saying that what they've thrown out there is interesting and has some merit, but they've got to reconcile it with the validity of the long season. So if you have 2 more minutes here, I would say where they are now, just with the 5 playoff qualifiers and 2 wild cards per league, they could make the wild card round best 2 out of 3, with all 3 on the home field of the better wild card qualifier. That makes sense. And they could make the division series best out of 7 instead of best out of 5. That also makes competitive sense. And they'd only have to cut the season back to 156, which is 1 3-game home series for each team, in order for the World Series not to push into November. Or if they wanted to add 1 wild card in the present setup, they could give first-round buys to the 2 highest playoff qualifiers, so you have less of a chance of an extreme inequity there. Or if and when they go to 32 teams, which is going to happen somewhere down the road, then you could reconfigure into 2 8-team divisions per league, arranged geographically. Then logically, completely logically, the 2 division winners get a bye, and you have 4 wild card teams per league. And there you wind up with something that's expanded, it's modernized, but it still respects the importance of the long baseball season.
You feel better?
I feel so much better now, and I don't have to pay you $75 for the hour on the couch.
I'm here for you, Bob. I'm here for you.
You always have been, Dan. You always have been.
I'm here for you. Thank you, Bob.
You're welcome, Dan. Thank you.
Bob Costas, Hall of Fame broadcaster.
For more Dan Patrick Show, tune into Audience Channel 239 on DirecTV. Stream for free on BR Live or download the Dan Patrick Show app.